যদি সবাই ফিরে যায়, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায়, যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায়, তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি আলো না ধরে, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে, যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে, তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে, আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে।
Why is my mic always muted? Thank you guys. Thanks for joining the live stream. It's a very short live stream. We'll discuss just this 6-page paper on how possibly Jyoti Basu, CPIM, ended up making the tigers, and mainly the tigers and some alligators as well, as far as I've heard. I've not read the paper. I've heard a lot about this paper. How those tigers turned into man-eaters by feeding on the flesh of Namashudras of Bangladesh who had come to West Bengal for refuge. Now, firstly, it's been a nauseating experience not reading any book or research paper, which I kind of hit a pause button on even much earlier than I stopped reading any books or discussing books from my live streams. And finally, I can breathe easy again because I obviously had to cover Bengal stuff only, and because it was that relevant. You cannot be in an insulated situation or completely out of touch from society and go around discussing philosophy while the fate of Bengal and Bengalis is practically doing walking on a thread. Okay, and during that phase, I had to cover and keep tabs on a bunch of low IQ retards, then some mid IQ retards, and a few absolute gems of human beings. But I'm glad that I'm finally back to discussing research papers. And after a long time, when I was clicking on the playlist, which playlist to send this live stream to, it felt nice to finally click on papers and article discussions. That's a separate playlist on my YouTube channel, on this channel, where you all can check out the about 40-50 research papers we have discussed. I think 23 papers on caste alone, which is a separate playlist called Caste Papers. Those of you who are coming here for more knowledge-related stuff, not just information stuff, should check out those videos on our channel. Okay. Now, let's start this paper. The problem is I've kind of forgotten how to make it full screen on JSTOR. I used to read from JSTOR exclusively at one point. I don't know how to do it anymore. Yeah, this is it, right? Yeah, nice, found it. Okay, let's start then, guys. This paper is by an environmental anthropologist called Annu Jalais. She's still alive. She has given some interviews as well on this. So let's check out what her research showed, okay? When is this paper from? I'll just check that out first. 2005. Okay. Let's start, guys. It's just a 6-page paper, but it must be remembered because this is the stuff that CPIM did. This is the stuff that today's CPIM supporters, kids who are in their 20s, have absolutely no clue about the atrocities of CPIM. So it's important to remind them because a lot of them are under the impression that the party that's currently in power in West Bengal is equally as bad as the party who just left, etc. and only their CPIM has never done any wrong thing in their lifetimes, because Dipshita, Meenakshi, they seem such nice educated people. How can such nice educated people do anything bad ever? How can they even hope for anything bad? How can they wish for something bad? So we'll find out what insanity they did. Dwelling on Morichjhanpi, this is the name of the paper. When tigers became citizens and refugees became tiger food. In 1978, several hundred Bengali refugees in Morichjhanpi, Namashudras by the way, one of the northernmost forested islands of the Sundarbans, were brutally evicted by the authorities for violating the Forest Acts. This paper looks at how the memory of Morichjhanpi was evoked by the islanders to reveal their resentment about the unequal distribution of resources between them and the Royal Bengal tigers of the Sundarbans Reserve Forest. What the fuck is this sentence? Holy shit. My God. The government's primacy on ecology and its use of force in Morichjhanpi was seen by the sustainability, was seen by the Sundarbans islanders as a betrayal not only of refugees and of the poor and marginalized in general, but also of Bengali backward caste identity. At the same time, the reasons leading to the Morichjhanpi massacre have to be understood in relation to the long history which led to the partition of Bengal and the intricacies of caste, class, and communal differences. Annu, Jalais. Refugees and Bengali identity. I'll just put it up here so that I can scroll and look at the comment section. Link for research paper, it's on JSTOR. Alapan, I'm reading it right now from JSTOR. You'll have to just type the name of the paper. Okay, this is the name of the paper. Dwelling on Morichjhanpi, when tigers became citizens, refugees became tiger food. Refugees, tiger food. Okay. All through the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s, Bengali Hindus. It takes a lot of time to scroll on JSTOR. I remember this. Let's see if I can zoom out anytime soon. Yeah, this their UI is really slow. Wait some more. Oh my God. Oh. All through the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s, Bengali Hindus from what had become East Pakistan and subsequently Bangladesh entered West Bengal in the hope of settling down. They were, however, sent to various inhospitable areas outside West Bengal with the assurance that they would eventually be relocated in West Bengal. Soon after the Left Front came to power in 1978, they found their refugee supporters return. Amongst them, about 30,000 managed to sail to Morichjhanpi, one of the northernmost forested islands of the Sundarbans, from where they were brutally evicted for violating forest acts. At that point, out of the blue, all CPIM could think of was the ecology guys. Oh my God, ecology. What will happen to ecology? That you see, they loved ecology so much they shut down all industry as well. Based on nearly 2 years of field work in the Sundarbans, this paper looks at how the memory of Morichjhanpi was evoked by the islanders to talk about their resentment about the unequal distribution of resources between them and the Royal Bengal tigers of the Sundarbans Reserve Forest. This paper looks at how the government's primacy on ecology and its use of force in Morichjhanpi, that saw hundreds of refugees dying, was seen by the Sundarbans islanders as a betrayal not only of refugees and of the poor and marginalized in general, but also of the Bengali Nimno Borno identity. Nimnavarn. In fact, the Morichjhanpi massacre was considered a double betrayal by the Sundarbans islanders. They argued that it was because they were considered as lesser mortals, situated at the periphery and marginalized due to their social inferiority by the Bhadralok, meaning Brahmans, Boidos, Kaistos of Kolkata, by which is meant the anglicized, well-connected, educated, moneyed, essentially the Hindu upper caste, and mainly urban Bengalis, specifically Brahmins, Boitos, Kaistos, no two ways about it, Bengalis, the tigers taking the cue had started feeding on them. As developed by Ross Malik, who is the authority on Morichjhanpi research, the reasons leading to the Morichjhanpi massacre have to be understood in relation to the long history which led to the partition of Bengal and the intricacies of caste, class, and communal differences. Briefly, in the colonial period, the East Bengal Namashudra movement had been one of the most powerful and politically mobilized Dalit movements in India. In alliance with the Muslims, they had kept the Bengal Congress Party in opposition from the 1920s. The exclusion of the Bhadralok from power led to the Hindu elite and eventually the Congress pressing for the partition of Bengal at independence so that at least the western half would return to their control. And this is the horseshit spouted by both Ross Malik and Joy Chatterjee, if I remember correctly. And this is a simple agree to disagree moment. We can move on from this retarded point. Partition, however, meant that Dalits lost their bargaining power, lol, when divided along religious lines of Hindus and Muslims. Oh, what a surprise. And became politically marginalized minorities in both countries. With the partition of India, threatened by their Muslim and lower caste tenants, the upper caste landed elite formed the first wave of migrants from East Pakistan into West Bengal. Subsequent migrants were rural middle class cultivators and artisans. If the richest among them found a niche amongst relatives and friends in Kolkata and its outskirts, the poorer amongst them squatted on public and private land and tried to resist eviction. In the 1960s and 70s, especially after the Bangladesh War of Independence in 1971, Mujibur Rahman's assassination in 75, and Ziaur Rahman's coming to power, communal agitations started to hereafter be directed against the poorest and low caste Hindus who had remained in East Bengal. They now sought refuge in West Bengal. Unlike their richer counterparts who were backed by family and caste connections, many of these poor migrants did not find a way of living in Kolkata and were sent to various inhospitable and infertile areas, most infamous amongst them being Dandokaranyo, a semi-arid and rocky place in east central India, which included parts of Orissa and former Madhya Pradesh and Andhra Pradesh, now in present-day Chhattisgarh. Yeah, and Mana camp, right beside the Raipur airport, is where a lot of these Namashudras had also settled. A lot of people from Morichjhanpi ran away and saved their lives by running away to Mana camp in Chhattisgarh. Thus, an area entirely removed, both culturally and physically, from the refugees' known world. The opposition denounced the Congress's attempts to evict the refugees from West Bengal and promised that when they came to power, they would settle the refugees in West Bengal, and that this would, in all probability, be on one of the islands of the Sundarbans. So it was a complete betrayal. Many refugees, especially those from Khulna, had preferred... Now, see, they do not mention CPIM so far. They keep saying opposition, that party, this party, etc. And that's being done because this paper is being written in 2005, and she'll have dire consequences if they do not. Many refugees, especially those from Khulna, had preferred settling in the inhabited islands of the Sundarbans, where they had erstwhile neighbors and relatives who had come from Khulna to clear forests in the West Bengal part of the Sundarbans during the early part of the century, rather than go to the totally alien area of Dandokaranyo. In 1975, many of those who had been sent to these camps started to move to a sandband called the Morichjhanpi, which was part of the Morichjhanpi island in the Goshaba police station. It was thought to be possible to settle 16,000 families there, another 30,000 refugees in nearby Dattopashur, and in other Sundarbans places that had quote-unquote cultivable wasteland. However, in their repeated attempts to settle there, they were brutally evicted from the various train stations where they congregated on their way to West Bengal, were starved of water and food whilst in Morichjhanpi, and finally were even shot at before being brutally evicted from there. Now remember, this is not a sociology paper. This is a paper written by an environmental anthropologist. So you probably won't get those specific angles that you are expecting. It will be completely different angles and lenses. The growing polarization of West Bengal and East Bengal as separate homelands. Okay, Academic Man is asking for something urgently in my chat. Wait, I'll just reply to him. Okay. The growing polarization of West Bengal and East Bengal as separate homelands for Hindus and Muslims respectively affected most the lower caste, poor, rural population, especially of lower Bengal, who were not divided so much along religious lines as along the cultural and economic divide of Bhadralok / Nimno Borner or Nimno Borger Lok. The contending elements in being both Bengali and Muslim has often been addressed. However, the tension that exists when one is Bengali but not a Bhadralok has been less studied and needs to be recognized to comprehend why the islanders believed that they had become just tiger food for Kolkata's Bhadralok. Though there has been a growing emphasis, especially following the publication of Ranajit Guho's elementary aspects of peasant insurgency in colonial India 1983, and subsequently in the Subaltern Studies series on rural communities' consciousness through the study of rural movements in colonial Bengal. But as Dasgupta argues, these studies focus overwhelmingly on the religious discourse of the Nimno Borger Lok, especially in relation to resistance. While understanding religion is important, privileging it over all else distracts from the equally important economic and political spheres, and from alternative, less well known cultural spheres. In this case, the framing of community consciousness was not so much driven by, was not so much undertaken through the valorization of religion, but through a divide along caste/class, which was expressed through local narratives on Morichjhanpi and tigers turning man-eaters. Here, through the rejection of the tiger as an animal one needs to be proud of due to its status as quote-unquote national animal of both Bangladesh and India, the islanders' narratives of tigers highlighted their perceptions of an unjust history. What this paper attempts to underscore is how the Sundarbans islanders internalized the injustice they felt had been leveled at the poorer refugees' claims for settlement in West Bengal, and why they sought their request had been trivialized. Soon after my arrival, I was told that the main reason why tigers had become man-eaters could be traced to the violent events of Morichjhanpi. Many islanders explained to me that they and tigers had lived in a sort of idyllic relationship prior to the events of Morichjhanpi. After Morichjhanpi, they said, tigers had started preying on humans. This sudden development of their man-eating trait was believed to have been caused by two factors. One was the defiling of the Sundarbans forest due to government violence. The second was because of the stress which had been put thereafter on the superiority of tigers in relation to the inhabitants of the Sundarbans. The brutality and rhetoric with which the refugees had been chased away, coupled with measures of safeguarding tigers which the government initiated soon after the events of Morichjhanpi, had explained the villagers gradually made tigers self-important. With this increased conviction of their self-worth, tigers had grown to see poorer people as tiger food. This was the sort of myth in that locality. That's what she's explaining. The anthropomorphization of tigers in relation to the villagers' history intrigued me. The essence of one's Bhadro identity is often revealed through one's romanticized vision of nature. In this case of the Sundarbans, which literally means beautiful forest, and of wildlife, here of the Royal Bengal tiger. Bhadralok's sensitivity to the Royal Bengal tiger with its association to both the regal and colonial images of hunting, as well as to its current position as national animal, has often been deployed to mark the urgency of having the Sundarbans named a World Heritage Site and prime tiger area. But the anthropomorphization of tigers into that of a Bhadra symbol of national animal, an image I shall not dwell on in this paper, was questioned by the islanders through their presentation of another image of the tiger. Shrugging off the colonial and national drape of this Bhadra tiger, it portrayed the animal as one whose gentle, inoffensive nature was irretrievably transformed into that of a man-eater following the bloody events of Morichjhanpi. Highlighting this transformation of their tiger was a way for the villagers of reclaiming the forgotten pages of a history which had relegated them to oblivion, an injustice they felt they had been done by the urbanized elite who believed tigers were more precious than them. It was not just it was not urbanized elite or group or something, it was just Jyoti Basu, who believed tigers were more precious than them, the Nimno Borner or Nimno Borger Lok. Brutal evacuation of refugees from Morichjhanpi. In 1977, when the Left Front came to power, they found their refugee supporters had taken them at their word and sold their belongings and land to return to West Bengal. In all, 150,000 refugees arrived from Dandokaranyo, expecting the government to honor its word. Fearing that an influx of refugees might jeopardize the prospects of the state's economic recovery, as if CPIM had any plans of economic recovery, the government started to forcibly send them back. Many refugees, however, managed to escape to various places inside West Bengal, one of these being the Sundarbans, where they had family and where they would be able to survive by working as fishers. From the month of May the same year, about 30,000 scheduled caste refugees, under the leadership of Satish Mandal, president of the Udbastu Unnayonshil Samiti, a former close associate of the Communist Party's refugee program, sailed to Morichjhanpi and set up a settlement there. Morichjhanpi, an island in the northernmost forested part of the West Bengal Sundarbans, had been cleared in 1975 and its mangrove vegetation replaced by a governmental program of coconut and tamarind plantation to increase state revenue. However, and we'll have to wait for JSTOR's glitch. However, though this was not an island covered in mangrove forest, the state government was in no mood to tolerate such a settlement. It stated that the refugees were in quote unquote unauthorized occupation of Morichjhanpi, which is a part of the Sundarbans government reserve forest, violating thereby the Forest Acts. And that, okay, now these are the, okay, gali nahi dena hai. These are the people who today want Rohingyas to be settled in West Bengal at any cost. Forest Acts and that refugees, where is it? And that refugees had come with the quote unquote intention of settling there permanently, thereby disturbing the existing and potential forest wealth and also creating ecological imbalance. See, this is exactly what I was discussing even in last night's live stream. You see, my home has been built, my office has been built. Now we'll talk about sustainable development. Until my house was being built, until my office space, office area, entire office neighborhood was being built by demolishing forest after forest, displacing wild animals, killing them, sending them in a fucking prison called zoo. Up until that point, development was really good, and we'll complain why isn't there development happening, etc. Right after my house is built and my office is built, all of a sudden it's sort of a sustainability, saving forests and stuff. You see, it's the same California fuckery that Jyoti Basu did back then that today's commies do. The government placed primacy on ecology. But this argument believed the villagers was more to legitimize their ejection from Morichjhanpi in the eyes of the Kolkata Bhadralok. And Kolkata Bhadraloks are that dumb. Yes. Oh, हाँ, ecologically कर रहे हैं तो कुछ सोच समझ के ही कर रहे होंगे. The argument that this might be a precedent for an unmanageable refugee influx from Bangladesh was also heatedly argued as baseless. Indeed, as Ross Malik argues, by then the last wave of East Bengali migrants had been forcefully driven out of the state, and those who would have settled in Morichjhanpi would not have been a financial liability for the state government. The refugees from Dandokaranyo were joined by people from the villages of the adjoining Sundarbans islands of Shatjelia, Kumirmari, Puinjali, and Jharkhali. Many islanders, being the descendants of immigrants from Khulna in East Bengal, brought by the British even as late as 30s and 40s to reclaim the forest, identified with the refugees. A lot of them also shared close blood ties with the refugees, ties reignited through visits and gifts of paddy and vegetables. Young landless couples were urged to settle with the Morichjhanpi dwellers. Their intimate knowledge of that part of the forest and the generous lending of boats and dinghies were further recompensed by the refugees' eagerness that they too settle in Morichjhanpi to strengthen their case. When narrating their memories, if some of the islanders evoked their dismay at finding their ponds emptied of water overnight due to the refugees' initial dependence on the adjoining islands' pond water for their survival, most islanders also drew on memories of fraternal bonding. Morichjhanpi Island, being 125 square miles, was so big that the refugees were keen that the islanders join them so as to have, quote unquote, hands raise buns and voices carry our pleas to Kolkata to help improve the dire economic situation of the Sundarbans region as a whole, rather than squabble over land which, being neither fertile nor theirs to distribute, was not worth fighting over. The settlers, both refugees as well as islanders who had come from the adjoining villages, initially built some makeshift huts along the cultivated area of the island, beneath the government's coconut and tamarisk trees. I have never heard this word tamarisk. I don't know what it is. If anybody can comment here, that would be great. Most of them survived by working as crab and fish collectors in the forest, and with the help of the islanders, by selling their products in the nearby villages. In the memories of their time there, the Sundarban islanders often undermined the fraternal bonding they shared with the refugees and their immense belief to have finally come across vocal leaders. They underlined the fraternal bonding. In contrast to the ruling elite of their villages, composed essentially of large landowners who aspired to migrate towards Kolkata, they saw the East Bengali leaders as more apt to represent them. They explained that this was because they were poor, rural, and low caste, and hence not afraid to take up manual work such as fishing, and knew, through the twists of fate, what it was like to fight for their rights. As a whole, the refugees were looked up to by the Sundarban islanders of the islands adjoining that of Morichjhanpi, because they were better educated and more articulate than themselves, and because, having lost everything, they were seen as having the moral courage to face the Kolkata ruling class with their rural concerns. The islanders often expressed their awe at the way the East Bengali refugees rapidly established Morichjhanpi as one of the best developed islands of the Sundarbans. You see, this is what I've been saying since I came back shooting the documentary in Memari as well, meeting only Motuas all around me. entrepreneurial spirit and a sort of a fuck you attitude to authority, not disrespect, but the lack of fealty towards authority is what I think characterizes. Uh, it would be, I think, possibly inaccurate to say Bengali lower castes, but to some degrees, every Bengali at one point had it, but they are the ones who still keep having that vibe, more or less. Um, as opposed to, you see, what today's Bhadraloks, how they think, what they do, the numbers of teeth that come out whenever they meet a Trinamool MLA MP. Okay, people touching the feet of 30-year-old Trinamool MPs. Okay, that stuff is not was at least not being done by Namashudras back then in Morichjhanpi, and it's not being done by Motuas today in Memari, at least. Within a few months, tube wells had been dug, a viable fishing industry, salt pans, dispensaries, and schools established. And commies want you to believe that only and only Lokhir Bhandar can save people from poverty. And this contrasted lamentably with the islands they came from, where many of these facilities were and are still lacking. This is in 2005, guys. 2005. It's still lacking in 2005. Now, many people believe, many scholars, many Morichjhanpi scholars believe that the main reason, because it's kind of a mystery why exactly Jyoti Basu decided to do that massacre. The argument I most believe in is that Jyoti Basu was very pissed off that these people were pretty quickly becoming self-dependent and stuff, and all they wanted was an access to Kolkata's market to sell their fish and their vegetables that they are growing. They cleared out the forest. They started entrepreneurship in the forest without anybody's help. Stories abounded about the spirit of bonhomie and solidarity between refugees and islanders whose similar experiences of marginalization brought them together to bond over a common cause, which was to fight for a niche for themselves. This would become a metaphor for the reclamation of voice in the new West Bengal. The villagers explained the refugees' bid to stay on in Morichjhanpi as a dignified attempt to forge a new respectable identity for themselves, and they were on their way to earning it, not getting handed to them, and not getting it handed to them by the state. They were almost on the way. They were almost about to earn it all, and then they were eliminated from the face of the earth. So that no even precedence is set in Indian society that yes, you can say fuck you to the government and still be successful. You don't have to beg and suck the state's dick for every help in your life, like the kind of stipends we have today in West Bengal for marriage, death, birth, treatment, sari, makeup, everything. The villagers explained the refugees, yeah, this we did. Yeah, bid to stay on in Morichjhanpi as a dignified attempt to forge a new respectable identity for themselves, as well as a bid to reclaim a portion of the West Bengali political rostrum by the poorest and most marginalized. They had also hoped that this would be taken up by the governments as an opportunity to absolve itself of the wrong it had done to the poorer refugees by sending them away from West Bengal. Unrepentant, and despite this display of self-help and cooperative spirit, the government persisted in its efforts to clear Morichjhanpi of the settlers. On the January 31st, 1979, the police opened fire, killing 36 persons. The media started to underscore the plight of the refugees of Morichjhanpi and wrote in positive terms about the progress they were making in their rehabilitation efforts. Photographs were published in the Amrito Bajar Potrika of the February 8, 1979, and the opposition members in the state assembly staged a walkout in protest of the government's methods of treating them. Fearing more backlash and seeing the public growing warm towards the refugees' cause, the chief minister declared Morichjhanpi out of bounds for journalists and condemned their reports, saying that these contributed to the refugees' militancy and self-importance, and instead suggested that the press should support their eviction on the grounds of national interest. So Jyoti Basu was calling journalists anti-national. Anybody who claimed who spoke in favor of Morichjhanpi victims, Namashudras, were indirectly branded anti-nationals, guys. Let this know. Let this information get passed on to all 20-year-old commies you know today. Okay, let me see if Academic Man is sending me something important. Okay. He probably doesn't know I'm in live stream. Support their eviction on the grounds of national interest. After the failure of the economic blockade announced on January 26, an ironical twist to Republic Day, in May the same year, the government started forcible evacuation. 30 police launches encircled the island, thereby depriving the settlers of food and water. They were also tear gassed, their huts razed, RAZED, their boats sunk, their fisheries and tube wells destroyed, and those who tried to cross the river were shot at. To fetch water, the settlers had now to venture after dark and deep into the forested portion of the island and forced to eat wild grass. Several hundred men, women, and children were believed to have died during that time and their bodies thrown in the river. The Calcutta High Court ordered a 2-week lifting of the ban, but this was not properly implemented. Based on Sikar and it probably is Sarkar and Bishwas's pieces in 1982 and also in 82, Ross Malik estimates that in all 4,128 families who had come from Dondokaronno to find a place in West Bengal perished of cholera, starvation, disease, exhaustion, in transit, while being sent back to their camps by drowning when their boats were scuttled by the police or shot to death in Kashipur, Kumirmari, and Morichjhanpi by police firings. How many of these deaths actually occurred in Morichjhanpi, we shall never know. However, what we do know is that no criminal charges were laid against any of the officials or politicians involved. Even then, Prime Minister Morarji Desai, wishing to maintain the support of the communists for his government, it's all the same political morality. Validation of communists. Yesterday I saw Hindol fucking Dasgupta write this in Twitter, that his father was probably murdered or something by the CPIM, and therefore BJP must adopt all of the freebie policies that are advocated by leftists so that CPIM can be kept at bay. Genius. Do the same things as your enemy so that the enemy doesn't come to power or the enemy doesn't become strong. Hindol Dasgupta, such an expert in history, philosophy, even political science, I think. Even the Prime Minister Morarji Desai, wishing to maintain the support of the communists for his government, decided not to pursue the matter. Many refugees and villagers had voted for the government coalition based on their stated commitment to resettling the refugees in West Bengal. The refugees saw the brutality of the government as one that had been possible because it was backed by the Bhadralok, Brahmins, Boitos, Kaistos. Incidentally, Hindol Dasgupta is a Boiddo, who perceived the refugees and the Sundarbans islanders as lesser beings who came behind tigers in their classificatory scheme of importance. With the betrayal of Morichjhanpi, the islanders voiced how they felt that the distinction between the urban as central and the rural as peripheral was reinforced. Morichjhanpi, a double betrayal. I'll have a sip of water. In the villagers' memories, these events were recounted as a war between two groups of people, one backed by state power and modern paraphernalia, the other dispossessed and who had only their hands and the spirit of companionship. Joyanto, an islander who had gone there as a young man with his wife and baby child, gave a poignant narrative of the course of events at Morichjhanpi. He remembered how when the refugees saw their children dying of cholera and starvation, they tried to break the cordon formed by the police and the military launches. They sent arrows made with wood, aimed pieces of brick and dried mud from their slings, and verbally abused the government officials. The officials urged the police to retaliate by throwing tear gas bombs and use firearms. A war was on, one group fighting with wooden arrows and stones, the other with tear gas, guns, loudspeakers. For greater protection, the 30 launches were covered with a wire netting, and police camps were established in the surrounding villages. As one islander put it, the launches started looking like, quote-unquote, stinging swarms of floating beehives. The ease and brutality and actually such a beautiful analogy here. It was a random islander from Sundarban putting it so beautifully. Stinging swarms of floating beehives. That's what he compares the police existence there with. The ease and brutality with which the government wiped off all signs of the bustling life which had been built there in the last 18 months were proof for the villagers that they were considered completely relevant to the more influential urban Bengali community, Brahmins, Vaidyas, Kaistas of Kolkata, nothing else, especially when weighed against tigers. In 2 weeks' time, all the plots had been destroyed and the refugees packed off. Were we vermin that our shacks had to be burned down? Rhetorically asked one of the villagers. The refugees were then forcefully put in launches and sent to Hasnabad, where lorries, meaning trucks, carried them back to Dandokaranno or to the Andamans. Many of the islanders who had been rounded up along with the refugees now fled, often with some of their newfound refugee companions from the lorries taking them back to Dandokaranno. They came back to their former islands and settled along with the embankments. Many others built shacks along railway lines or in places like Barashat, Gobordanga, or Bonga in West Bengal. To understand the identification of the islanders to the refugees, the social context of life on these islands has to be underlined. The Sundarbans, a cluster of about 300 islands, of which half were reclaimed and inhabited under the British, is situated in the delta of the Ganges and stretches between West Bengal and Bangladesh. It is crisscrossed by numerous rivers, making access to the islands difficult. The forested Sundarbans island of both West Bengal and Bangladesh, put together about 10,000 square kilometers, provide the large remaining natural habitat of Bengal tigers and are home to some 600 of them. With the success of Project Tiger, launched a few years before the events of Morichjhanpi in 1973, the Sundarbans' fame grew phenomenally and has since 1985 been included in the UNESCO's list of World Heritage Sites. The usual portrayal of the Sundarbans is that of an exotic mangrove forest full of Royal Bengal tigers rather than that of a region which is often referred to as Moger Mulluk for the lawlessness and violence which characterizes it. Okay, Moger Mulluk is has a very interesting etymology for non-Bengalis. Mulluk to means mulk. Okay, it's colloquially called Mulluk in Bengali. Hardly so. It used to be at one point. Mulluk means any area. Mulk any राज्य. Now Mog कौन है? Mog है the Arakan tribes. Okay, they are the Mogs. So वो Mog का मुल्क. Moreover, the lack of basic infrastructure such as electricity, drinking water, and health centers make it one of the poorest regions of West Bengal. The Sundarbans region is also referred to as Kolkata's servant, Kolkata's Jhi, due to the large now and that West Bengal is India's G. What a turn of events. How the turntables. Sundarban chilo Kolkata's G, এখন Kolkata Noida's G. Due to the large number of people from this region working as servants in the houses of Kolkata's affluent, before the introduction of shrimp seed collection in the 1980s, the islanders had barely enough to eat. For many islanders, especially those who owned no land, working in the forest was the only way of making a living. Jointo, reflecting on the hope the arrival of the settlers had brought them, had longed to start a new life in Morichjhanpi, where for once the aspirations and rights of the lowest would be established. But he and his family had barely been there 5 months when their shack was burned down by the police. And interestingly, she does finally mention CPIM in the next paragraph. So far, Jyoti Basu's name is not being mentioned. It's being called the Chief Minister. But remember, guys, send this video or this paper to each and every under 30, under 35 commie you know. He wondered why the government was bent on reclaiming Morichjhanpi for tigers when it wasn't even part of the tiger reserve. Listen to this. Holy shit. Jointo and his family had barely been there 5 months when their shack was burned down by the police. He wondered why the government was bent on reclaiming Morichjhanpi for tigers when it wasn't even part of the tiger reserve. Yes, because who the fuck would go inside a tiger reserve to start their settlements there? Obviously, they were not in the tiger reserve. The other sore point was that the refugees had been promised land in the Sundarbans. He saw the betrayal by the government as the proof that for the Kolkata Bhadralok, they were just tiger food, disposable people who could be shot at and killed because they wanted the homestead they had been promised. Within the CPIM, there were divisions over the way the party leadership had handled the matter. The CPIM cadre felt that the leadership had washed themselves off the responsibility of the poorer refugees in a bureaucratic way, when it could have used the issue to develop a mass movement against the central government's discrimination and neglect towards Bengali refugees vis-a-vis the Punjabi ones. Very well said. This was a great idea. I don't know who came up with it, and we all know who shoved this idea down his own throat. However, the CPIM State Committee's political organizational report was keen to close the matter and issued a statement saying that there was now, quote-unquote, no possibility of giving shelter to these large number of refugees under any circumstances in the state. Accusations were made. The Land Revenue Minister Binoy Chaudhary made the unsubstantiated allegation that some foreign agencies were behind Morichjhanpi. Videshi Shakti ka haath, guys. The elusive Videshi Shakti, forever in everything in India. The CPIM had also blamed vested interests, reactionary forces, acha matlab wahan pe bhi RSS, Congress I and PC Shen, I don't know who that is, for using the, who is PC Shen? PC Shen for using the issue for political gain and claimed that it had met the challenge and had ultimately achieved success with the return of the refugees to Dondokaronno in May 1979. The islanders had bonded with the refugees not only because they shared with them a common place of origin, which was eastern Bengal, but also because they could identify with the terrible hardship that they had gone through. Stressing his affinity with them, Jayanto recounted how during the time they had settled in Morichjhanpi, they had all quote unquote become one big family. एक हाइटर सोसाइटी भी बन गया था. As they had quote unquote the same hopes, went through the same ordeal, fought on the same side. तो एक exclusive group बन रहा था with the same consumption patterns. That was till the moment Kolkata let them down. After that, he said, quote, we each went back to the islands or camps we had come from with broken hearts and bloody hands, a broken, disunited, and utterly weakened group, end quote. The chapter was quickly closed. A few journalists questioned the capacity of the upper class people, communists or others, to represent the poorest strata of Bengali society. As noted by a journalist in the Bengali paper Jugantar, quote, the refugees of Dondokaronno are men of the lowest stratum of society. They are mainly cultivators, fishermen, day laborers, artisans, and the exploited mass of the society. So long as the state machinery will remain in the hands of the upper class elite, the poor, the helpless, the beggar, the refugees will continue to be victimized. Okay, this is another horseshit view. So this is the view that says that the moment a Dalit becomes the CM, all of a sudden all Dalits will have Teslas. Like the Kool-Aid that Bengalis bought. Let's have a woman chief minister, and all of a sudden after that, all women will be safe. Okay? What retarded philosophy is this? And most academics in India get this horseshit from the British education that our founding fathers did, reading their books. Oh my God, when will this end? The only way a Dalit will have a better life is with free fucking market capitalism, which can be done by anyone who loves free fucking market capitalism, whether he's a Brahmin or a Shaha or Mondol. Quote, why have our dead remained unaccounted for and unmourned by the Babus of Kolkata, forced to hover as spirits in the forest, while a tiger who enters our village and then gets killed puts us all behind bars, asked Jayanto, voicing a general bitterness. New repository of Bhadralok violence, Royal Bengal tigers. Oh. Now, half-broken embankments and the few fruit trees planted by the settlers during their stay remain as the only vestiges of previous human habitation on Morichjhanpi. This is from 2005, okay? The rest has been reclaimed by the forest. We shall never know exactly how many people lost their lives. According to many of the islanders, only 25% of those who had come to Morichjhanpi left the island alive. This figure is important because it reflects what the villagers feel rather than for its factual veracity. The main thrust of the argument about the bloody events of Morichjhanpi was that the people of the Sundarbans felt that they had been betrayed by the government and the Kolkata urbanites, meaning Brahmins, Vaidyas, Kaistas of Kolkata. In many ways, Mujib's assassination was seen by the villagers as marking the end of the newfound friendship between India and Bangladesh. Hindus and Muslims, Bhadralok and Nimnobornir Lok, people and tigers. The villagers explained that tigers, annoyed at the disturbances caused by the unleashed violence in the forest, had started attacking people, and that this was how they ended up getting a taste for human flesh. Others argued that it was the corpses of, this would make more sense, obviously. I think both make sense completely. Others argued that it was the corpses of killed refugees that had floated through the forest that had given them the taste, absolutely. Morichjhanpi was a turning point after which man-eating became part of the tiger's nature or behavior. If in the early days, explained the islanders, tigers, to keep a balance with their fellow human neighbors, did not reproduce quickly, it was believed that now their reproduction rate had gone up because the government gave them fertilizing injections in the hope that they would reproduce faster. Yes, and they have created hybrid tigers, which are even more dangerous. Fearing a mass revolt, the government hides the true figures of tigers and always quote ridiculously small numbers, said an islander. It was often expressed that the government was happy as long as the tigers thrived because, remember guys, we have a flailing state, and what we always do is premature emulation. So our policies will be imported from California and Norway. And this is that. It is for the validation of white liberals. It was often expressed that the government was happy as long as the tigers thrived, and that in contrast, you see sustainability. Whether the islanders lived or died, as had been the case for the refugees, made no difference because they were just tiger food. These measures, which were believed to reflect the government's inherent conviction about tigers being more important than the fishers, honey collectors, and woodcutters of the Sundarbans, were taken to be one of the more important reasons for tigers turning man eaters. After Morichjhanpi, tigers had become quote unquote arrogant. I was often told, as an old woman explained, tigers initially were fine animals that were afraid of people. They were compassionate and were agreeable to the fact that the products of the forest and rivers were to be shared with people. But now, she lamented, due to the legitimizing of killings in their name, they had turned egotistical and did not hesitate to attack people. Now, tigers were no longer the neighbors with whom the forest had to be shared, but state property. And backed wherever the state goes, they will fuck things up, and fucking commies in the BJP ecosystem will keep on advocating for socialism while terming anything pro-market as Western-style capitalism. State property, tigers. And backed by the ruling elite, they had begun to treat the islanders as tiger food. In a final show of desperate anger, the refugees had cut down the government plantation of coconut and tamarisk before leaving the island of Morichjhanpi. Just as now, every time the islanders were angry with the representatives of the state, they destroyed public property, cut down trees, broke solar lights, and looted greedily from the various schemes launched by the government. As we are treated as lesser beings, we act as is expected of them, said one of the islanders. I think that tradition is today alive because of lack of development. Because our driver in Chhattisgarh told me, when I asked him about Mana camp, which was it's literally a camp because of those Namashudras who came from Bangladesh during that time, and some of them ran away from Morichjhanpi and to Mana camp. He said that it's a hub of criminals. They're all gundas and stuff. You suppress people who have a propensity towards violence. You suppress their propensity towards violence. You suppress their propensity towards entrepreneurship. You'll get this. Their energies, their propensities, their inclinations, their intuitions were not allowed to flourish. And that's why we have this problem today. Now, not to digress too much, but propensity of violence and some outlet is required, which is also being prevented today in Bengal. After Morichjhanpi, the tiger's importance only kept increasing. All through the 1980s, various experts argued in the leading Kolkata dailies over the Sundarbans tigers' quote-unquote natural propensity for man-eating. The government devised ruses to thwart the tiger's predilection for human flesh. Between November 1986 and October 1987, it took up the project of digging freshwater ponds inside the jungle, placing 4 electrified dummies dressed in used clothing to give them a human smell in strategic spots in the forest, and distributed 2,500 plastic masks free of cost among honey collectors and woodcutters permitted to work in the buffer zone of the Sundarbans. The main intention for digging these ponds was to sweeten the nature of tigers. The dummies were installed with the belief that the tiger would stop attacking humans after it had received an electric shock. A safety fuse and a low current of 20 to 25 milliamps ensured that it was not fatal to the animal. Yeah, that negative reinforcement thing. Each dummy was connected to a 12-volt battery through an energizer that delivered a current of 230 volts. The masks were to be worn front side back, as it was believed. It's still done today. It was believed that the tiger, in his custom of attacking from behind, on seeing another pair of eyes peering at them, would leave his target puzzled and chastised. These were believed by the villagers to be baseless preventives. It's done even today. Because they did not address the real issue, which was that there were increasing numbers of people killed by tigers because the existing means of livelihood was the only mechanisms the poorest could rely on for their subsistence. The current average is of 150 people killed per year by tigers and crocodiles in West Bengal alone. Getting killed by a tiger in the Sundarbans in the 1980s was a terrifying prospect for family members, co-workers, even the entire village of those who worked in the forest. The victim's body had to be abandoned in the forest for fear that the forest officials would get to know about it. The new widow and the victim's children were forbidden to cry and taught to say that their father had died died of diarrhea because, if exposed, the family members were exhorted to pay for the dead trespasser and were in effect treated like criminals. Faced with the people getting killed by tigers, the only remedial procedures the West Bengal government could come up with were geared towards changing a tiger's nature. A nature understood along the Bhadralok's view of tigers and nature. There was absolutely no engagement with the local ways of understanding the reasons for tigers having become man-eaters. Such a privileging of one understanding of tigers' nature over another continues to establish hierarchical divisions between peoples. In other words, a discourse on tigers' man-eating nature's naturalness was and still is a way, as the villagers explained, of legitimizing by the Bhadralok leftist government the relative unimportance of the Nimno Bornel look, especially when measured against the tigers. The decline of the Namashudra movement, which started with the Bhadralok's call for the partition of Bengal, and which led to the death of thousands of refugees, not only marked a growing unequal access to West Bengal in general, and Kolkata in particular, and associated disparate resource distribution, but also revealed a dilemma of a greater order, that of being a Bengali, yet not a Bhadralok. The proof to this lies in the fact that those killed in the Morichjhanpi massacre are yet to find justice, and their stories yet to appear in histories. And we are yet to see a director who has the balls to make a movie on Morichjhanpi. I'll check out comments for a while and then come back later with our main live stream discussing current affairs in West Bengal. Okay, let me see what have you all been discussing in the comment section. A super chat came. Oh, that's a membership. I just read somewhere that someone filed an FIR on Vaibhav Suryavanshi because he's too young to. ऐसे कैसे बच्चा खेलेगा तो बॉल नहीं लग जाएगा? FIR करना ही चाहिए, सरकार को कुछ करना चाहिए, काहे बच्चे खेलेंगे? Had raised a Morichjhanpi question at the Khola Hawa event. Acha. These cases need to be highlighted to bring nuance to the caste violence narrative. As he says, take the ball to. हाँ भाई, taking the ball to their court. ये फ्रेज के साथ एक बहुत एनिमिटी है बीजेपी को सिस्टम का. बॉल आएगा उसके कोर्ट में तब ऐसे करते रहेगा हमेशा से. Never. That's why they're not. No, I don't know to digress, but it's the same thing that's going on in West Bengal today. Okay, then I'll take your leave now. See you all at around. What's the time? See you all at around 7:30 or 8. Bye bye, guys. Thank you for joining. Send this to all your under 30s commie friends.
যদি সবাই ফিরে যায় ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায় যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায় তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না তবে একলা চলো রে যদি আলো না ধরে ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে তবে বজ্রা নলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে একলা চলো একলা চলো একলা চলো একলা চলো